guys! On our last Dr. Heart TV, we discussed why awareness is the first step to making any major change. I asked you to practice noticing, which includes identifying things in your life that are causing you irritation or discomfort, watching for them. So we're not taking any actions or using any judgments, but we're kind of just naming them to ourselves when they happen. And then I asked you to think about this practice of noticing when you work with the residents. You can use noticing to help them name a success, especially when you recognize that they've done something outside of their comfort zone. And you could also name it to yourself when it seems like a resident has gotten herself into the same old bind again. And that's something we'll talk about in just a little bit, that same old bind. I share that I've never made a change in my life without first doing this practice. The truth is, oftentimes those behaviors that irritate us are actually serving a very specific purpose, and it's only through the process of noticing them that we can understand their value to us. Wait, did you just say that a character defect can actually be helping me? I did. Our character defects are not accidents, and that's partly because they're created in response to something. I'm going to take Julie as an example. So when Julie was young, if she got hurt while she was playing outside and she told her mother that she got hurt, her mother called her careless and told her that it was her fault. Most times she didn't get a Band-Aid or any other kind of care from her mom, but what she did get was a whole lot of guilt. Julie decided to never tell someone when she was hurt, so she withholds or omits her real feelings to avoid recreating the situation. She thinks if she just hangs on to what she's feeling and never names it, she'll never have to go through that experience again of like having it be made like it was her fault, that that pain was all her fault. And that makes total sense to me. We do a lot of things to survive, including keeping pain private so we don't increase what we already have. And for some of us, being in pain when we're not around kind people is like blood in the water for a shark. You know, a moment of pain or a moment of weakness is actually the moment where the people around us know that they could negatively affect us even more. So, but now, Julie's 36. She's living on her own. She has a great job. And she will never, ever, ever, ever say if she feels disrespected at work or assigned too many tasks or like someone's stepping on her toes. She's not going to name any of those things, right? And while she won't say anything, she does develop deep, deep, deep resentments about it. Julie has kept her practice going strong. She processes those resentments all on her own, and she uses things that help her check out, like alcohol or binge watching TV or overeating, all of that to deal with that resentment she feels. And the sad part is that nobody even knows that she's going through all of that because she's made this commitment and this long-standing commitment that she's not going to share when she feels pain. So how is omitting or not being honest or not saying what she actually feels actually helping Julie? Because it is. So let's play the situation through. Julie would have to name how she was feeling. And if she did this in the office space, it could risk conflict, especially as people have kind of accepted Julie as someone who says yes to everything. It might really shock them to hear her all of a sudden say, no, or I'm unhappy, or I actually cannot do that right now. It helps Julie to omit her real feelings because she can keep her old story going strong. She is responsible for her own pain. That's a story that her mother taught her, and to make sense of why it happened to her, she keeps it going, right? So by not naming her own pain, it allows her to agree with her mother, so she never really has to process that something wrong happened or experience what it might have felt like not to get those Band-Aids, not to get that love, not to get comforted in moments of pain. Two, Julie re-victimizes herself. She tells herself that she's a person who's misunderstood or not heard when she never actually risked saying the wrong thing. So Julie feels unique and disconnected and like no one will ever get her, and she's never actually given anyone a shot to get her in the first place. And the third thing that Julie gets from omitting her real feelings is her checking out process, because it's actually way easier to go home and have a drink than it is to tell a colleague that you feel overworked or disrespected. Julie can keep this cycle going for a long time. So, how could this practice of noticing have helped Julie? Well, let's play it through even further. If I was working with Julie, well, that would actually be a real victory because that means Julie would have admitted to me that she wants to just discover something different than what she has, right? That would be a good step. But if she did that, I would ask her a couple of things. One, I would ask her to take me through the moments that she knows she felt angry or upset. What does it feel like in the moment you choose to keep that feeling private? We know from Dr. Heart TV that it's actually a hurricane of unaddressed feelings inside, or trauma, that is responsible 75% of the time for fatalities within our population. But holding on to that kind of feeling can hurt and impact anybody. So I would also ask Julie, what happens after you come home from a day like that? What do you do? And how do you feel when you check out? Maybe she has some guilt around it. Maybe she has some excitement around it. Just again, very non-judgmental, very blank-faced. This is what it feels like when I practice that behavior. And third, and I think most importantly, I would ask her how she felt when she woke up the next morning. After having gone through this cycle of holding on to pain and then self-processing it, what happens next? Sorry. I would do this with Julie until we had some baseline of a pattern. Even though they don't feel like it in the moment, feelings are patterns. When we feel mad, like really, really mad, it feels like it's happening to us for the first time ever. We think we created mad. We think our mad is the baddest mad out there. And we think it's going to solve something. But if we sat down and did a little tracking of the times we felt like that, we see that it's not a new feeling. It's probably pretty primal for us and originated in a moment we needed it to survive something tricky. And now it's our go-to. Same problem as Julie. Mad is one way we hang on to not saying the real thing. Mad is a mask. Mad covers true conversation. If I told you about the last 3 times I've been mad like that, you'd see that it's basically the exact same situation playing out again and again and again. Maybe with different characters in it, but at its core, it's the same. And I'd be willing to bet that it's the same for Julie every time she checks out. Every time she omits a real feeling, it's probably a pattern of omission that she's not saying. So once we realize that our feelings in the moment have very little to do with who we actually are, and even more so what we want to be going forward, in other words, once we recognize those patterns and accept that our feelings and behaviors are always just trying to solve the same thing unsuccessfully, we become more willing to take a new approach. But for me, and maybe for you too, I need to know that my anger is not serving me before I'll work to give it up. I need to see it in action. I need to play it all the way out and bring it to a professional to get a new perspective on it. And then I need to work with my bumpers on, real slow, and find small tweaks to make it as I work through making this behavioral change. So for me, if like Julie, anger was my thing, I would need to know my anger more before I'd be willing to let it go. And also, I'd have to be really willing to say, I don't know what to do in those moments I feel anger, aside from express my anger. So I would need to be willing to develop some new tools around that. Ultimately, each time I go through a process like this of noticing a behavior, understanding and accepting why it serves me, and becoming open to handling it a new way. Oh, yeah, because most of us actually have way more than one of these behaviors that we need to work through. Anyway, each time I go through that process, I learn that I steer that ship. I have the power to keep the defect or to try something new. When I accept that mad isn't something that happens to me, but something I create, I begin to learn that I don't need it anymore, or at least that it would be worth trying to make something new. This is a little like harm reduction for character defects, creating awareness, being informed about the patterns of feelings, and also how you are steering that ship all of the time makes it easier to want to make a change. And also recognizing that just like with a substance, we actually oftentimes love and appreciate our character defects. We actually think that they're really good for us or they're helping us in some way. And just when you help someone, you give them the room to do the same. Like you get to acknowledge how your rage has served you before I ask you not to be rageful. You also get to know you also get to know that you don't know what to do without it yet. and I could help you find ways in there. So this is particularly helpful this time of year because what noticing actually does is interrupt a pattern, and family members and holidays are some of the oldest patterns that many of us have. And family members, maybe that mad button gets pushed again and again, or maybe that anger button gets pushed again and again, or maybe they treat you like a kid still, or whatever the pattern is. They know exactly how to push those buttons because they made them and they put them there, and now they know where to find them. But what if you didn't have to respond the same way when somebody pushed your button? What if you controlled that? What if you were steering that ship? What if you were the one who found, that button being pushed and you reacted in a different way? I like to think that once we learn that we have the power to do that, we can practice it. And it doesn't mean we're always going to practice it with grace, right? Like, it doesn't mean you're going to get this right every time, or all of a sudden that long existing button isn't going to be there. But it could sometimes, and sometimes it only takes responding differently once or seeing yourself take a different action to really inspire a whole new set of possibilities for what your patterns with people, what your relationships, what your feelings and responses could be like. And sometimes in those moments, we might act like someone we admire. That's something that I do a lot. If I feel like one of those, Julie's omission or anger or rage coming up, I'm like, how would someone I love respond in this moment? And I act it out. And sometimes it's the best that I got, but it helps me. Anyway, for holiday noticing starters, if you'd like to try this, think about the role you usually play when you're with family and friends and celebrating. Think about how it's played out in different years, and then try doing the opposite. I just like to take a moment to encourage you that our residents are going through precisely the same thing. They have had patterns of feelings around this time of year. They're probably re-experiencing them right now in the house. Maybe, celebrations for people who've had trauma can be really tricky, especially if you're a person who, like, bad things have happened on your birthday, because it's like, oh, it's just like any other day, but it's a little bit worse because it was my birthday. So it could be really tricky to live through your first holiday season in recovery and be willing to accept that a holiday could mean you get to watch TV with your friends for the day and that's it, or you get a couple slices of pizza. My holiday tradition is actually going to Times Square because nobody seems to know that it's a holiday there. Everybody's in the same rush. They're bumping into you. They're kind of looking at you like, what are you taking so long over here for? And I love that. I love that kind of disorientation. But it wasn't like that at first. Traditions and new patterns are something that we build over time. So while you're kind of examining that for yourself, I want you to invite a resident to do the same, to just say, like, a holiday could be a celebration, Christmas, whatever we are celebrating, could be a little different than it's been before. And maybe that's the first step, is just acknowledging that there's a different way. Anyway, I will actually see you all on this Friday. I'm excited to catch up. I'm excited to learn more about how you're doing. And thank you so much for joining me today. Okay, bye.